We're back, ladies and gents, for another Rings of Power breakdown as we kick off the second half of Season 2. Now, if you watched my Episode 4 breakdown or joined my watch party, you'll know I was not a big fan of last week's episode, despite the inclusion of Tom Bombadil, a character I really enjoy from the books. So going in this week, the big question for me was, could the show rebound from what I felt was a pretty big low point? Or would we get more of the same? I'll share my thoughts on this episode later on, but let's get rolling with the story, lore references, and theories at hand. The episode starts out with a glorious mountain range shot as we get a more muted version of the Khazad-dûm theme, which gives a more sorrowful feel as we launch back into the Dwarven realm. It transitions to a Dwarven Ring of Power that we saw Durin III holding in a lot of the promo images for Season 2. Now, 2 episodes ago, we saw Celebrimbor and Annatar starting to make the Dwarven rings with mithril provided by King Durin. So we've skipped ahead just a bit where the dwarves now have these rings back home. Durin takes the flashiest one to go with his bubbly personality, and as we see the remaining 6, we hear whispers coming from the rings. While I personally think it works better that this be a unique feature of the One Ring, I can at least see how Sauron taking part in the forging of the others gives some validity to showing this as a representation of Sauron's evil influence. It definitely makes for good shorthand for those perhaps only familiar with the films. Durin III shows up at a digging site where we find Narvi and Durin IV are working on digging new shafts. As we previously saw the existing light sources collapse due to aftershocks of Mount Doom. We already see Durin acting a bit spacey. He kinda seems he's not fully with it. Kinda like how we saw in a brief moment with Celebrimbor in Season 1, itself kind of reminiscent of Bilbo forgetting the ring was in his pocket in the films. The ring seems to lead Durin to a specific point of the rock of where to dig. His son is like, "Dad, this is a load-bearing rock." And Pops is like, "Stop dwarf-splaining to me and give me an axe," and starts picking away. Narvi dismisses the workers as the king might just bury them all if they stick around, and we see he digs for some time before the rock gives way and a shaft opens up, revealing sunlight. We then see Durin going around telling dwarves where to dig as Khazad-dûm gets sunlight once more. Durin speaks to the halls filled with dwarves as we see the sun returning. And I like that we also got a shot of the sun returning to the tree Elrond gave to Durin IV. That was one of the most touching moments in Season 1, and I like that we get a couple moments with it in this episode. Everybody seems pretty pumped about the return of the sunlight, except Disa and her backup singer. I guess their singing to the mountain is old tech now. Sorry ladies, you're like printing out MapQuest directions and Durin's ring has built-in GPS. Next, we cut to Celebrimbor and Eärendil speaking to a group of elves and dwarves about their cooperation. I chuckled a little bit because he's talking about their unlikely friendship, but the groups ain't about to intermingle, so they stand on opposite sides of the room. A quick note on a change from the books here, Celebrimbor speaks about how impossible this friendship was said to be. However, the stereotype of elves and dwarves hating each other does not apply to these specific groups. The animosity between dwarves and elves stems from events of the First Age, between the dwarves of Nogrod in the Blue Mountains and the Sindarin elves of Doriath. What we have here are the dwarves of Khazad-dûm, an entirely different clan, and Noldorin elves of Eärendil, likewise a different clan of the elves, one that has always gotten along better with dwarves. So while the show is playing into the whole stigma of dwarves and elves never getting along, that isn't really the case for these groups. Next up, we get the reveal of the Doors of Durin, the famed West Gate of Moria that Celebrimbor and Narvi created together. These appear just as Tolkien's iconic illustration in the books, and they have some really great symbolism. We see a crown with 7 stars, this being Durin's crown and the 7 stars which Durin I saw in the mirrormere above his head, leading him to found the location of Khazad-dûm. Below that, we see a hammer and anvil, an emblem of Durin himself. Next, we have 2 trees wrapped around the pillars. We don't know for certain, but these may in fact be a representation of either the 2 trees of Valinor or Galadhilion, the tree which Yavanna made for the elves in Tirion, the elven city in Valinor, which we likely glimpsed in what I thought to be the best shot of Season 1, as Finrod crested the hill in the premiere episode. Next, we have a star emblem. This is the sign of the House of Feanor, the house of Celebrimbor's grandfather. Now, if we look in the top corners, we can see the Tengwar Kalma, or C, standing for Celebrimbor, and in the top right, the Tengwar Ore, or N, which stands for Narvi. I don't think it's visible in any shots that we get here, but in the center bottom of the door, there is a Tengwar Ando, or D, for Durin. Lastly, we get the Elvish script across the top arch of the doorway, which reads, Enin Durin aran Moria, pedo melon amino, im Narvi hein encant, Celebrimbo o Eregion, taithant ithiuhin, which translates to, the Doors of Durin, Lord of Moria. Speak, friend, and enter. I, Narvi, made them. Celebrimbor of Hollin drew these signs. Now, one thing I wish they would have done in this shot was to let in moonlight in order to show the doors glowing. Narvi goes on to say how this is visible only by moonlight, yet we can totally see all the inscriptions without moonlight. It would have been a pretty easy fix to have them glow with a shaft of moonlight from above, and tied into the moment from earlier in the season when Celebrimbor was working on Ithildin, the substance made from mithril which glows in starlight and moonlight. Narvi then says the doors are guarded by a password known only to friends, a nod to the fact that the Elvish word melon, meaning friend, is the password. Another fun note from the books on this particular element, the password was no big secret back in the Second Age, hence the reveal of said password on the door itself. This door is made during a time when the dwarves of Khazad-dûm and the elves of Eregion are in great friendship and open trade with one another. In Fellowship of the Ring, Gandalf says these days were happier times, when he discovers the all-too-simple password. We then get a nice moment of Celebrimbor complimenting but also poking fun at Narvi. And I gotta say, I think it's a shame that this might be the one and only interaction we get between these two. I really love the glimpse at a jovial friendship between two craftsmen of these races, but I fear it will only be a glimpse and the Doors of Durin and this friendship a mere cameo, which is kind of a shame. We then see Annatar walk away to the upstairs balcony, and he and Celebrimbor talk about his speech's length before we see Sauron work more of his manipulation on Celebrimbor. He says he can't stay festive while those most affected by Mordor remain suffering, leading Celebrimbor to bring up the topic of rings for men. They go back and forth with Celebrimbor calling Annatar out for leading others to make the conclusions he wants. They bring up Númenor, and Annatar has a nice bit about how it's a remarkable place, but teetering between glory and ruin. He drops the line, I fear Númenor more than any land in Middle-earth. And there's actually a bit of truth in this, though later in the age. Sauron would come to realize that he could not defeat the Numenoreans by force, because they were simply too great and powerful. In the earlier years, however, he would find that men were easiest to sway, but sought out elves because they were far more powerful beings. Annatar says they should find the great among men to become ring-bearers, and drops some key names of great men from the past: Eärendil, Tuor, and Beren son of Barahir. We've had a number of direct references to Eärendil already in this show. The father of Elrond, Eärendil was half man, half elf himself. He would sail west to Valinor and plead with the Valar to intervene against Morgoth. Eärendil's father is the next person mentioned, Tuor. Tuor would play an important role in the elven realm of Gondolin, where he would marry the king's daughter Eärendil. Tuor also has a number of heirlooms passed down through the line of Númenor, some of which we saw in the background in Season 1. And finally we have Beren, arguably the most iconic of the three, part of Tolkien's great love story of Beren and Luthien. The two would go on a great quest to steal a Silmaril from the very crown of Morgoth. Their love is so legendary that when they die, they are sent back by the Valar to have a peaceful life with the green elves of Osiriand. And in many ways, the story of Aragorn is a mirror to that of Beren. Annatar says they should make 9 rings because the perfection of the 3 thrice perfected for their third forging. Now this felt a little clunky to me, but not nearly as bad as the hemming and hawing over making rings in Season 1. Celebrimbor actually says no, saying the rings of power are complete, which kinda surprised me. Annatar then says he will make the 9 himself. Next we travel to Númenor, where Pharazôn talks about the White Tower of Eressëa, visible only by the keenest eyes from the peak of the Menel Tarma. This white tower that lies on Tol Eressëa in Valinor is the Tower of Avallone, the the city and seaport on the eastern side of the island. In addition to the peak of Men-el-Tarma, we learn in the Silmarillion that it could also be seen by the far-sighted from a tall ship which sailed as far west as it was lawful to go. For the Valar forbade the Numenoreans from sailing so far west that they could not see their own island. And I gotta say, I really like this scene with Pharazôn. It starts to show what is at the heart of this character and the circumstances that bring about the darkest days of Numenor. The tower, which was once a symbol of where their elven friends came from, becomes a reminder of their own mortality. We read in the Silmarillion that as Numenor reaches the midway point of its history, they said among themselves, "Why do the lords of the West sit here in peace unending, while we must die and go we know not whither, leaving our home and all that we have made? And the Eldar die not, even those that rebelled against the lords. And since we have mastered all seas, and no water is so wild or so wide that our ships cannot overcome it, why should we not go to Avalone, and greet there our friends?" And some there who said, "Why should we not go even to Aman, and taste there, were it but for a day, the bliss of the powers? Have we not become mighty among the people of Arda?" The Eldar reported these words to the Valar, and Manwë was grieved, seeing a cloud gather on the noontide of Numenor. Back to the show, we find Pharazôn, who now has the scepter, is now king of Numenor. And I'm totally digging this Pharazôn who has seized power and begins to seek even greater things. His son Kemen, who I've honestly just found to be annoying thus far, says, "Let's make a Numenor you've always envisioned," and Pharazôn kinda takes a sharp left turn, talking about when Kemen's mother was breastfeeding him, she prophesied that he would come to ill ends. Which is like, pretty dark, maybe a sign to switch over to formula. But Pharazôn won't tell him anymore, saying Kemen needs to impress him in the task ahead before he says more. We then go to Miriel's tower where they can hear people chanting Pharazôn. And personally, I like to think that it's the same people we saw 2 episodes ago, and they've just continued chanting this day and night ever since. Elendil wants Miriel to command the Sea Guard and to fight back against Pharazôn, but Miriel isn't up for it. She asks Elendil what he saw in the Palantir when he touched it, and we get a brief vision of Elendil riding away from Armenelos. We can see the statue of Eärendil, as well as the main royal building where much of the series has taken place. I noticed that we have a few pillars of smoke, and I have a feeling this is at some turning point in the Faithful versus Kingsmen storyline. Some minor book spoilers, of course, but things get so bad in Numenor that there are human sacrifices to Morgoth, with the Faithful themselves being sacrificed. Perhaps one of these pillars of smoke is coming from the Temple of Morgoth, which is one day built. As for where Elendil is riding to, we can't really be certain. In the books, Elendil and the Faithful, including his sons Isildur and Anarion, sail out of the downfall of Numenor from the port of Romena on the island's east coast. However, in the show, we've heard references to Anarion being west, which was also an important location for the Faithful. So perhaps Elendil is finally going to meet up with his estranged son when Armenelos becomes too dangerous here in the show. Because Elendil saw a different vision than the destroying wave Miriel saw, she believes that perhaps Pharazôn's takeover will actually avoid the destruction, which book fans will find ironic. We then see the seaport and can spot some of the old elven architecture. We noted in Season 1 that Numenor is designed where a lot of the older architecture is elven, whereas the newer stuff is different by design. Elendil comes across Valinor, and it turns out anyone deemed loyal to Miriel is stripped of rank. When he asks on whose authority, his daughter Eärien chimes in with, "On mine." So we find she is fully thrown in with Team Pharazôn, and I'm sorry, but I've just got to say it again, just look at this Kemen dude. Don't you just want to punch him in the face with this stupid smirk? Okay, punchable face aside, I gotta say, it is nice that these two characters seem to finally be serving a purpose in this story. This episode as a whole is definitely the most interested I've been in either of their characters. We'll see more from him later, but in this episode, Kemen becomes a sniveling punk I hate because he does evil things to heroes, rather than me hating him because he's a sniveling punk just taking up screen time. Elendil and Eärien have a testy chat, with Elendil pointing out that while Balzagar wanted them all charged with treason, overthrowing the queen has earned his daughter a promotion. And I like that Elendil sticks up for the Palantir here as well, saying she mocks that which is sacred. As we covered previously, the Palantiri are not some evil artifacts. though they seem to be portrayed as such much of the time. They also don't really show the future in the books. That's something original to the show. In actuality, they are primarily communication devices, though there are hints they could possibly be used to see glimpses of the past as well. Eärendil says Ar-Pharazôn is your king, and this is the first time we get this full title. In the books, there is great significance to the prefix attached to the ruler's name. Miriel's father is Tar Palantir. He took his ruling name in Elvish, as was tradition started by Elros Tar Miniatur himself, the first king of Númenor. Tar being the Quenya word for high. Starting with the 18th king of Númenor, they began adopting an Adunaic or Numenorian name when ascending to the throne, a sign of their gradual rejection of the elves and Valar. This 18th king was actually Ar-Belzagar, the name they borrowed for the Lord character that we see in the show. Thus we get Ar-Pharazôn here, with the prefix also meaning high, but rejecting the Elvish naming convention. As Eärendil turns in his sword and makes to leave, we get this nice moment where Valinor announces Captain leaving deck. And much to the chagrin of jerkface Kemen, the soldiers all honor him as he leaves. It's a nice moment, and I gotta say, I'm really digging the tensions in Númenor rising with sides being taken. It does, however, feel a bit sudden for these really harsh lines to be drawn among the more common folk like Valinor here. Eärendil says she might be able to help Valinor by putting in a good word with the king, but she touches his arm, so in Kemen's mind, she clearly wants to smoochy kiss Valinor, which makes him mad. To his credit, Valinor's like, no, you made it clear who your true friends are. Slam! In your face, Eärendil. Next, we get Pharazôn taking the cover off the Palantir. Clearly, he's about to go down the rabbit hole of using this thing, but that will be saved for future episodes as we don't see any more from him this time around. Next, we get a voiceover of Celebrimbor's letter making it to Gil-galad in Lindon, where he claims the forge has been shut down, and I couldn't really focus on what he's saying because they're using one of the Doors of Durin as a freaking table? What the heck, guys? Don't you have like a sheet of plywood or something you can use instead? This is a masterwork that will last for millennia, and you're just gonna set your tools, schematics, and I don't know, probably Starbucks cups or whatever other junk on it? Yeesh, guys. Next, we get Gil-galad in Lindon as one of his advisors is giving the hard sell on leaving now for Mordor. She seems pretty set on trusting Celebrimbor's message, but Gil-galad has foresight of destruction. He sees a bunch of fish with barely any water, probably a result of the river running dry. As we could tell in some of the trailers that elves and orcs were fighting in the dry riverbed around Eregion. We also see what appears to be an orc on fire, along with the silhouette of Sauron in his armored form. Then we see what I think is an orc drinking blood. We then get more lines from the advisor really pushing for them to send forth the fleet, making it sound like if they don't immediately, everything is doomed. We get a quick shot of Elrond running and ditching his cloak on his way back to Lindon. Then we are back in Khazad-dûm, where Durin and Disa are chatting as they care for the elven tree. Disa mentions her resonating skills being a gift from Aule. Aule has been name-dropped quite a bit on this show, but he was the Vala who created the dwarves, and naturally would be of great significance to their people. Durin and Disa talk about the power of Durin's ring, and that's something we'll definitely get into a bit later on when I give some of my overall thoughts. We find at the market that the king is basically charging a 50% tax rate, which seems extreme. Disa is pondering her recently purchased orb when it gets knocked out of her hand and rolls like really far away. It leads her to an underground lake where we get a major hint at some dark terror living below. This could be a hint at the Watcher in the Water, the kraken-like creature that attacks the Fellowship thousands of years later. This creature is believed to have escaped the deep waters beneath the mountain and made its way out to the flooded area outside Moria when the Fellowship encounters it. Next, we see King Durin speaking to emissaries from the Dwarven realms, which I was honestly glad to see because I was a bit worried they would just have 7 dwarves in Khazad-dûm get the rings, which would have made it feel too small in my opinion. Interestingly, there's only 5 dwarves aside from Durin at the table here, which makes me wonder where the 7th is. Also, to get super nerdy for a moment, by this point in the Second Age there are actually 3 of the dwarf clans living in Khazad-dûm, not just 1. After the destruction of Beleriand at the end of the First Age, the remnants of the Firebeards and Broadbeams of the Blue Mountains go to live in Khazad-dûm and join with Durin's folk. This leaves 4 other clans of the dwarves, all of whom originate from Rhûn: the Iron Fists, Stiffbeards, Blacklocks, and Stonefoots. Durin stops one of the emissaries from grabbing a ring, saying they're for the lords of their realms, and that it comes with a price, which we'll later find out is half a share of their mines. We then see Durin talking with Narvi about the dwarves needing to dig deeper, and the king freaks out when he realizes he isn't wearing his ring. And this is where my concerns about how these rings are being depicted really came to the forefront for me. Durin's behavior here is very reminiscent of Bilbo misplacing his ring in the films, and it just feels like they're kind of making the 7 into carbon copies of the 1. In the books, it's a pretty significant thing that the dwarves are not susceptible to the corruption Sauron intends the rings to have, and what we're seeing here feels like it's taking the corruption concept a bit too far. Rather, it would have been more accurate if we saw King Durin already have a measure of greediness in Season 1, with the ring amplifying that greed. Instead, we saw the king turn down the chance at riches with Mithril, and now he's pulling a total 180. Durin IV even says as much in a later scene with Celebrimbor, saying greed has never been the king's way. We'll see how this all proceeds, but if the dwarf ring is some super obvious source of corruption for the dwarves, how are we to expect them to pass on their rings for generations to come? As was depicted in the Hobbit films, albeit with a tweaked timeline, this very ring of Durin III will pass all the way down to Thorin's father, Thrain, before Sauron reclaims it from him in Dol Guldur. If the dwarven rings are a clear-cut evil thing bringing descent into madness, it's hard to imagine them being passed down. Durin IV barges in warning about the danger Disa discovered, but the king says there is no danger, and we can really see him becoming drunk with power here. Next, we're back in Eregion where there's a commotion as Annatar and the elves are working on the 9 rings for men. Myrddania, the elf with the obvious crush on Sauron, is made invisible by the ring, which Annatar chalks up to them trying out a new design. She describes being in a place like the Forge but shrouded in mist. She describes seeing a being with skin of flame and eyes pitiless and eternal. Now obviously she's describing what we've seen happen to characters like Frodo in the films. There's a distinction here though that beings experiencing this aren't actually becoming invisible, but are rather transported to the unseen world, kind of like a spiritual realm existing alongside the physical one. What she is no doubt seeing is Annatar's unseen form, as Maiar have a strong presence in both worlds. What's interesting here is that we also know from the books that elves who had previously lived in Valinor also existed in both worlds, which includes characters like Galadriel, and most notably here, Celebrimbor. So theoretically, Celebrimbor would have been able to see Myrddania even when she was invisible. As I mentioned before, the show seems to have a very loose understanding and kind of an odd interpretation of the unseen world, often using it as an ominous sounding thing that power can somehow be drawn from for the rings. Also, it's kind of dicey to have elves being turned invisible by rings of power, as that's only something shown to happen to mortals in the books. But I guess these are work in progress rings, so maybe they'll fix that bug in version 2.0. When Celebrimbor inquires what they did differently, they say they've added more mithril because of men being more prone to corruption, and that somehow affects the alloy mixture or something. This is kind of a recurring predicament the show has of trying to depict trial and error of making magical objects, and falls into this kind of trap of sciencing it, which doesn't usually go very smoothly. Thankfully, this instance is pretty short and gets cut short before Celebrimbor says how they should compensate for more mithril. Durin IV has come to ask Celebrimbor about the rings, and we can see the beginnings of Celebrimbor's suspicion of Annatar, as he insists he be the one to talk to him. Durin tells of his father's madness and questions how much Celebrimbor truly knows about this Annatar guy. Next, we see Annatar chatting up Myrddania, and he tells her that the monstrous form she saw was actually Celebrimbor. This, I think, is a great small example of Sauron's ability to deceive. He deceives everyone he comes in contact with. He flatters her by saying her hair reminds him of Galadriel, who in the books is well known to have amazing hair that reflects the light of the 2 trees. And he gets her to stay silent and plant seeds of doubt in her mind against Celebrimbor. It's good stuff. Next, we're back in Númenor where we have a group of the faithful having some kind of memorial ceremony, presumably for those fallen in last season's battle. And just when I thought we'd make it a whole episode without a callback, we get the priest guy using the line about Frodo seeing the Undying Lands, a far green country under a swift sunrise. So close. He concludes his words with Nasye, a Quenya word meaning Amen or let it be so. Eärendil sets out a candle, presumably in honor of Isildur. But then Dorkface Kemen shows up. Apparently they're going to demolish the oldest shrine in Numenor for a new aqueduct. Again, this feels like a really sudden about-face for the Numenorean population at large to go along with some of the extreme things we're seeing. In Season 1, we kinda got the sense that tensions were there and that the faithful were looked down upon, but I don't feel like we've gotten enough build-up to this kind of action happening so easily. And the way Numenorean mobs seem to so easily flip-flop is kinda wild. Kemen tries to goat Eärendil by asking, how does it feel to have a daughter that is ashamed of you? And it's like, yeah, I'm sure Pharazôn is just bursting with pride at his worthless, sniveling son. Anyway, we get an older man pointing to a statue saying if she's not stored, the souls for whom she weeps will be lost. This relic is no doubt Nienna, the Vala associated with grief and sorrow. The belief that the souls will be lost is a bit extreme, but it's a cool nod to a really great Vala. Nienna also plays a huge role with Gandalf, who we shouldn't see in the show, for he learned much from her during his time in Valinor. For she is not only the Vala of sorrow, but also of pity and courage. Stupid Kemen purposely drops the relic, shattering it, and finally somebody decks this guy. And I'm glad Eärendil was the one to do it. I can't help but dream up all kinds of bad endings for this dude right now. Eaten by orcs, eaten by wolves, impaled on a pike and used as a banner, all kinds of good options. The guards hold Eärendil and Kemen does this super weird chin grab thing. Honestly, what is this move here? This dude just reached a whole new level of creepy. Valinor stops him from hitting Eärendil and says king's men aren't welcome here, which is the first time we've heard this term, though I've mentioned it many times here on the channel. The Kingsmen faction really starts to make its presence known during the rule of Tar Ankaliman, the 14th ruler of Numenor. During his 165-year reign from 2221 to 2386 of the Second Age, the King's men stop using the Elven tongue, the haven of Umbar is made into a fortress, and the faithful build the city of Pelargir, a main settlement for their people over the centuries to come. Anyway, Dwayne the Rock Valinor starts fighting Kemen, and I gotta say, I was super pumped when Valinor breaks Kemen's arm. That was pretty great. But naturally, Kemen is a piece of human trash and stabs Valinor in the back after having his own life spared. Eärendil gets hauled off to jail as we're taken back to Eregion where Annatar and Celebrimbor are arguing about the Dwarven rings. Celebrimbor saying something is wrong with the Dwarven rings, while Annatar says perhaps the dwarves are using them wrong. Now in the background we can see in this and other shots that the schematics for the Doors of Durin are on one of the tables here. Celebrimbor asks if Annatar altered the dwarf rings somehow, which he did of course, but Annatar lies saying he didn't, but that they altered them together. He says that they brought deceit into the equation since Celebrimbor lied to High King Gil-galad. And as much as I don't care for the sciencing of things, I actually like this much more vague, soft magic reasoning, even if it is just a lie Sauron is telling. He says Celebrimbor must go to Lindon and confess, or they must push forward in their plans for further rings. Back in Khazad-dûm, Durin IV tries convincing Durin III that they shouldn't use the rings, but the king won't listen, saying he's proud of his son because it was his desire to work with the elves that allowed them to get these rings and save their kingdom. Then he offers Durin back his big ol' prince necklace. Back home, Disa makes Durin swear that he'll never wear one of the rings, and Durin promises he won't. Back to Eregion where we see Celebrimbor playing hardball with his smiths. He says the 9 must essentially bring balance to the entire project, drawing power from the 3 and redeeming the 7. And while this might seem like one of those instances where you wonder, how does that happen exactly? I think it's probably better left vague. Celebrimbor says they'll work night and day, and you can really tell he's starting to fracture under the stress of the situation, and I'm really curious to see where this goes. I'm expecting and hoping we get to see Celebrimbor really put through the ringer here. While I think we really could have used more screen time to establish his character and what makes him tick in Season 1, I think Charles Edwards has done a really good job of maximizing the moments he gets. After Celebrimbor walks away, we see Annatar swoop in to play good cop to totally undermine Celebrimbor's bad cop. The camera leads us out to the forests of Eriador where we see the orc army arrive within sight of Eregion. Elrond arrives in Lindon to tell Gil-galad that the orcs aren't in Mordor but heading for Eregion. Gil-galad says it might not be possible to send his army because he has reason to believe Sauron is the architect of all this. Which I can't help but think that Elrond in this moment would be thinking, yeah, no crap, I told you that back in episode 1. Then Gil-galad says their armies can't take on both Adar and Sauron, which I gotta say would probably make more sense if Sauron had an army. Like, there isn't much difference between the current situation versus if Sauron was the one leading the orcs, you know? Anyway, Gil-galad says they can't take them both alone, likely hinting at them calling for aid from the dwarves. Now, a long shot here is that they could call for aid from Númenor. This is what happens in the books as Gil-galad senses a darkness growing and Númenor shows up. However, this is well after the Battle of Eregion, so who knows, maybe that will be a Season 3 thing. Back in the orc camp, we find Galadriel is brought in a prison cart. They let her out, and Glug Orc here is about to cut her hair when Adar intervenes. Again, we've mentioned it before, but Galadriel's hair is pretty significant and symbolic in the lore. She would once turn down Feanor himself, who wanted a strand of her hair, yet later give Gimli the dwarf 3. She pulls a knife on Adar, who reveals that he brought her there as a potential ally, as they share a common enemy. We'll see where this goes, but I gotta say it would be pretty darn weird for an elf to team up with an army of orcs. The episode ends with molten metal spinning and a shot of Annatar looking on. So things are definitely ramping up toward the big climactic battle for Eregion that will no doubt play out over the last bit of the season. All in all, I think this was a pretty nice rebound after last week's episode, which I found to be one of my absolute least favorites of the entire series. This show clearly shines brightest when it's dealing with Celebrimbor and Annatar, and I'm really hoping we don't have any more episodes without the two Charlies in the final 3 of the season. I thought the unseen stuff continues to be a bit wonky, and there's definitely a departure from the books in that the 16 rings were originally also made for the elves, not with dwarves and men in mind. However, I feel this is a domino effect of the 3 being forged early, which I've gone over quite extensively before, so I'm just gonna try to take this at face value from here on out. Thankfully, we're getting some proper Annatar Celebrimbor stuff, which is what I was waiting for from the outset of the show. There's some interesting things happening in Númenor as well, and I like that we're getting the faithful versus kingsmen, though I worry that a lot of the foundation for this story has been skipped over. As a book fan, I can read more into things by inserting my own background context and history, but for the show as its own self-contained thing, I worry that more casual fans will be missing so much great build-up and context. Even as a diehard book fan, it feels like it's coming to a head haphazardly rather than as a result of a steady build. That being said, it's nice that the Kemen character seems like he's serving some sort of purpose. And I think the trifecta of Eärendil, Miriel, and Pharazôn could have some really great scenes with real power behind them if the show gives those moments to us. I think the actors themselves are definitely capable of giving us those great moments. Of the 3 stories in this episode, I'm actually most concerned about the Khazad-dûm storyline at the moment. This has long been one of, if not the strongest element of the entire show, and I think it's still playing with some really compelling pieces. I'm just a bit nervous seeing how fast this freight train to Crazy Town is going with Durin III. It's feeling a bit too much like extreme dragon sickness kind of thing, and less of a situation where the ring just amplifies what's already there. I'm also not super crazy about him taxing the heck out of his own people and other dwarven kingdoms. Again, it seems like something that could cause issues down the road regarding how the dwarven rings stick around in their families as long as they do. All told, I do think this was an episode much more in line with 1 through 3, and I definitely enjoyed it more than episode 4. But what do you guys think? Do you guys think this was a step up from last week? How are you feeling about the dwarven rings, Númenor, and forging ahead with the 9? Let me know in the comments.